All right, so we're back taking a look at this Git Management XUI. This is video 2 in an indefinite number of video series. Yeah, so right back where we left off. So resource types, I do want to take care of that real quick again before I forget. I want to make sure that anything that doesn't have a resource type tagged to it is set up to be, it would say none versus just empty. We don't need any empty columns. I think none is a little more impactful. So back over to our CloudBolt instance. I'm going to launch Shell Plus just real quick. I do want to check one of those blueprints that doesn't have a resource type just to see what it looks like. So a CloudBolt intro is, you look at the bottom left-hand corner, is ID number 177. So we're going to go into Shell Plus and capture that. We just did a service blueprint here recently. Actually, let's just do BP equals. And again, Shell Plus is handy. It brings back the last command that kind of like a tab, but also a history, like a mixture between the tab and history. So we're going to get 177, and then we're going to check, make sure we have a CloudBolt intro, bp.resource type is none. So it's empty. It's not none. We need to tell it that it's going to be none. So we're going to go back over into tab blueprints. And where we have this particular table row, what we're going to do is we're going to make a decision inside of Django. It's just going to be, we're going to do an if statement, if bp.resource underscore type. We want to use that resource type. I don't know that we need to have that necessarily. And if not, we're going to do, kind of fill that in for us. So that's kind of handy, but we're just going to tell it that this is going to end up being none. So let's go ahead and save and see what that looks like. Again, HTML was really handy. All we have to do is refresh. It's going to pull that HTML from the template file every time. There we go. So our resource type has now been updated to none. So yeah, so we have a good start here. So we've pulled in different blueprints. And eventually, I see this expanding to be blueprints and recurring jobs and allowing us to manage any type of content inside of CloudBolt, export it to Git, and really take over management. So the next thing I'm going to do is we need to figure out a mechanism for these connection info lists, each of these Git connections. We need to figure out how we want to handle a branching strategy for them. The way that I'm probably going to do that is I'm going to create a parameter, a CloudBolt parameter, which allows us to capture metadata about a resource. And I'm thinking two different things. Either I can create a JSON file that stores a configuration for these things, and then reference that and pull the content from the JSON file at the time we load this to pull all of this stuff in. But we want an additional column here that's going to be branch, a repo, and then branch. So we have the connection info, which allows us to connect to GitHub or whatever the repository is. But we also need to target a specific repo and a specific branch in there. And there's a couple of ways we could do this. We could allow the user to select from a list of repos, which I think I'll probably end up doing. I'm a big fan of querying and getting that data as part of a feedback loop. So why don't we do that? So let's do this. I'm going to just think through this for a second. Why don't we start with just writing the methods that's going to get the data from the GitHub URLs. And I've done a little bit with GitHub. Let me actually see. So I do have some GitHub content in that ARM templates repo. Let me go to my shared, and then I'm going to look for GitHub. Okay, get template from GitHub. So this would allow us, if we wanted to reuse this method, I could take this and it would get a an ARM template from GitHub. So that's probably not exactly what we want. That targets a single file. It does have some of the headers and information that we would need to connect to the GitHub APIs. So I think I may actually do this. So I'm gonna take a part of this. But what I may end up doing is writing a wrapper for these APIs. Let me see. Do you have any models in Shell Plus that refer to GitHub? We do some things under the cover, so I'm trying to think through how we authenticate to GitHub today. There is some things that we have built into the Terraform integration, but I don't know that that works explicitly either. So it might be handy to write a GitHub wrapper that's kind of standalone so that we can handle authentication, things like that through there. But I don't want to rewrite the wheel either. So I'm going to take a minute. I'm going to go parse the source code, see if I can find anything that has to do with that. I'm going to pause the video for now. Not really relevant to what we're trying to do. Actually, you know what I'm going to start with? I'm going to go over to my, sorry, I'm all over the place. This is what you get when you do an ad hoc recording. I'm going to go into my Git Management XUI. I'm going to make sure I'm in my utilities folder. I am going to then let's try and use GitHub Co-pilot a little more here. So I'm going to create a new method. I'm going to call it get GitHub repos. And I'm going to put some documentation in here. Returns a list of GitHub repos that are connected to CloudBolt. So that kind of filled that out for me. Let's see what it gives me as far as content here. I don't really care about connection infos. That's not necessarily what we're trying to do here. GitHub, I've just reinstalled my computer. It's not working the way that I'm used to, but let's try this. So GitHub Copilot over here, I'm going to refresh. Get GitHub repos. It's not really what I'm looking for. There we go. That's not a repo. I think it's thinking that repos are, let's do this. Query the GitHub API and return a list of repos. That's exactly what I want to do. So let's do that. I'm going to, again, refresh my recommendations here. Pass is not very helpful at all. I'm not sure what's going on with GitHub Co-pilot. It does not seem to be functioning the way I would expect it to. Here we go. So that's a little better. From GitHub, import GitHub. Pulling in connection infos. That's not really what I'm looking for either. So I'm going to pause for just a minute and I'll be back over. All right, so we're back. Actually, instead of doing the option with GitHub Copilot, I tried just going right to ChatGPT, and with the first question that I asked it, which is write a Python module that connects to the GitHub API by a token, turns a list of repos available to the user. I was able to get what I was looking for. So I'll kind of walk through the process here. So really, there's 3 lines here that I care about, right? I want to figure out my headers to pass to GitHub, which a big part of that is getting the token. I'll show you how I did that in just a second. The next portion is setting the URL. So the API github.com, this will return all the repos for the user that are available. And then finally, the response. This is using the request module in Python to reach out, get a request from GitHub. So I'm going to do a couple of things as we build this out. I'll probably build a class that handles authentication kind of for GitHub as a whole. And then I'll use this to pass in different URLs that pertain to the stuff that we're trying to go through. And that may change as we go through this. But anyway, for validation purposes, wrong place, back over to CloudBolt. So the very first thing I needed to do was get a token. So I'm just going to kind of walk through what I did already. And the token is stored in my instance in a connection info. So first thing I did was get a connection info. So connection info, there's just a recent connection info object I had just created. So it was the last one that I was looking for. I could have searched for it by name or ID or some other mechanism. Once I have that CI, I then set my token. And setting the token was not wanting to show up in my history. Let's go back. We can just scroll up in my history and take a look at it here. There's nothing going on here that really needs to mask anyway. So just kind of the validation process, trying to walk you through that idea. So token equals ci.password. So we have the connection info. We store the token in the password field. So it's masked, it's encrypted. We don't want users to have access to that, but we're able to reference that in our automation processes and pull it from those secrets capabilities. I then statically set my headers, set my headers to token, and I set my URL to that static URL. I then imported the request module. I then went to get a response from the URL and the headers, which is pretty straightforward. But then I got all of this content here. And then finally, the last thing I did, because what I want to do is allow the user to get a list of the full names for these repos, which should be the organization / the repo name itself. So yeah, we'll show that here in just a second. So yeah, so here's where I did it. But basically what I did is for repo and response.json, I printed the repo and then the full name for each of those repos. And you can see kind of in this JSON here, I think it's easier to see at the top. It's kind of not, it's not pretty printed right here, but there are ways to do it. I just saw that this is an array of items that were returned. First one is a repo called Ansible Tower, but I want them to be able to select not just the repo, but the actual organization or user that's associated with that repo as well. So where we saw that we were printing those full names, these are all, I did not, this token in particular, just like a CloudBolt, normally I would see all the CloudBolt ones as well. And yeah, so there's some, yeah, a bunch of different repos that are showing up in here that I may have access to. So once we did that, we basically have all of the code that we need to fulfill what we're trying to do. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to create, let's just get this out. Our terminal down there. Now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and go through, we're going to create a class for the GitHub wrapper. So we're in our utilities module, close the Co-pilot, just get that out of my way. We're going to go ahead and do class GitHub wrapper. And this is, it's not really a true wrapper. I mean, I guess it is, but this is how we're going to connect to the GitHub API. Where did I last do a useful class? I don't like that one. I want to find a new recent one. It's not it. Blueprint form now. CI form. A couple I did that extended something. I think the NSX stuff has some good examples. There we go. So this is effectively, this is a class that I use for NSX. I'm going to just copy this. Don't know. We'll go ahead and copy most of this, the init class and the rest of the things going on here. But when we go back to our utilities model, utilities module, Actually, I want to, yeah, I'm going to just create this from a generic object. I'm not doing a ton. I'm not really using an existing method, which could be bad, right? It could be a lot more work for me. But let's see, wrapper for the GitHub API. All right, so we have self. We don't need a resource handler passed in, but if we initialize this, that's what we do want to pass in is the token for the GitHub API. So one of the things that we're going to do as part of what we were just looking at is, and pull this up another window. I'm going to go ahead and go through and set up my headers to self dot token equals token, and then I'm going to do self dot headers. Too much. Pass our authorization in there. We can change our headers as we go through, or if we're leveraging different methods that need additional content added to the headers, we can increase on those headers as we get into those elements. And then let's do the base URL. There we go, api.github.com. Perfect. And I like to do base URL because a lot of times I'll reference and build out APIs or these things on the fly. But depending on the object that you're working with, GitHub may have some private capabilities where maybe they have an on-prem server. I'm not going to code this to address that for now. All of the public GitHub repos, which is I think the majority of customers we run into, they're all leveraging api.github.com. Or else I would probably do something like this where it ends up being, if we have a connection info, we would then, actually, I'm going to structure this a little differently. I would do like connection info dot username to get the user, no, sorry, connection info dot IP would be the correct one. So I'm actually going to change this. Instead of the token, I'm going to take in the connection info. And the reason I'm doing that is self.token. I can then do my coninfo.password. This is a lot easier to just take in the entire connection info object versus trying to get a password out of it, all of those kinds of things. And I can use the connection info object for other things that may be stored in it as well. So I'm just going to take that in. We have our token here, where instead of token is token, we're going to do token is self.token. So that's now going to resolve. Self.base URL. Cut that. So I'm just going to paste that back in. We don't really care about this. We don't really care about this. And then the init capability. You know what? Let's do that as well. We'll store the connection info as part of the base object so that it can be referenced on the road. Why does it not know? Here we go. All right. So I don't know that I need to init from the base class either, because we're not really doing a ton. Yeah, we're just going to let that go for now. So now we have our headers, we have our base URL, we have our connection info. The next thing I'm going to do is write a method. So get repos. That's going to go out. There we go. It's already building a lot of what I was going to do. So notice request isn't imported. So I'm going to go ahead and import the request module. Be careful when you have more than one result. Just you saw that earlier, it can be problematic. But now we have the requests. We can query the GitHub API. I don't know why it's picking up on that being capitalized. But we can call get repos on this GitHub wrapper once we get it set up. And what it's going to do is this. I also like to, though, I like to do, instead of calling requests from every single one of these, what I like to do is I like to do def request and kind of write a wrapper around these things. And the big reason that I like to do this, and I'm going to do request JSON because I think that's really what we want. This allows us, if I'm doing this, this gives me a way to handle error, to standardize error handling here. So we need self and we need URL because we're going to need the URL. We need to know which to get to. The first thing I like to do is raise for status. This is going to effectively raise an exception if we hit any issues with this request. So it's going to stop the process. It's going to raise for status. And then I'm going to return the JSON of that request. I don't need all of it. In most cases, maybe I change that as we get through this, but I'm just going to return the JSON from the request. And here, what I'm going to do is request JSON equals actually, I like just the request method, but what we can do is we can document it. Actually, you know what is even better versus passing this base URL for every single one of these. What we'll do is we'll say request URL equals self.base URL and then pass the URL in. This prevents a lot of passing request URL, and then we're going to say request JSON instead of this. We're going to pull this out. We're just going to say URL equals self.request the URL. So again, just help prevent us from repeating a lot of our code that we're doing. Power request JSON. Actually make this even shorter and quicker and to the point as we can just return that request. So when we go to get repos, we're just going to return the result of this request method. So just a real lightweight wrapper kind of to write those things. I am going to save this. I'm going to launch Shell Plus and validate that it's working. And then we're probably at the end of today's session just because of time. Okay, so just real quick, I'm going to do from, I don't need it in my utilities. I'm going to import the GitHub wrapper. And then I'm going to do git. I actually need my connection info. So CI equals, make sure it's the right one. It's the correct one. So now what I need to do is I need to do so GitHub equals wrapper, and we're going to pass that connection info in. So we should get connection here. So now we have GitHub, and then we'll have GitHub dot get underscore repos. There you go. There's all of our repos. So that's our JSON formatted. I'm going to actually store that and just loop through them again. So repos equals, and then for repo in repos. We're going to print repo name. There we go. And we've gotten all of our repo names. We could also do full name as well, but that's at least, we're starting to see how we can build a class to make things a little more reusable. We'll call this as part of some of our other methods here in just a little bit, but that's all we're going to do for today's session.